Tee Higgins and Zay Flowers are two players that you need to be buying from the AFC North right now. We'll explain why on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. On today's show, we're going to be discussing some players from the AFC North that we are interested in our dynasty leagues. And over the next several weeks, we're going to kind of break down every division in between Super Bowl coverage, Senior Bowl coverage, and any other breaking news. So make sure you're on the lookout for that. But Kate, we're going to start with the AFC North, your division here. And let's talk about some players that we are buying right now from the AFC North. Who do you got?
I'm going with Tee Higgins, who I assume will be a part of the AFC North moving forward. We don't really know. Set to be a free agent here in 2025. But coming off what I just think is such an impressive campaign here in 2024, we kind of written him off as a injury-prone guy. And I mean, that's not without cause, right? He has missed a lot of time in his NFL career, but he just looks so dang good. He looked like an alpha wide receiver. So when I see what he accomplished on the field, we saw that production in games he was available alongside Jamar Chase. He was producing, the touchdown upside for a guy like Joe Burrow, we know is kind of infinite when you have that caliber of a passer. He posted the second highest yards per route run average in his entire career, a career high 125.1 NFL passer rating when targeted, career high 70.2% catch rate. He was just so reliable in this offense here for the Cincinnati Bengals. Whether he moves on, whether he stays in Cincinnati, I just think it's really hard to put the tape that we saw in 2024 on, watch it, evaluate it, and say, I don't want more shares of that on my dynasty team.
So from week 11 on, he was number 2 in fantasy points per game at the wide receiver position. The only player that averaged more points per game was his teammate, Jamar Chase, on the other side. So just to show you, that's like what kind of ceiling Tee Higgins can have. Now, the question here is, where will Tee Higgins be playing in 2025? I think most people are coming around on the idea that the Bengals are just going to franchise tag him or try to sign him to a long-term deal because he's probably their third or fourth best player, and you can't let him walk out the door. I know it's a lot to be paying $75 million per year for 2 receivers, but that's their team. And if it doesn't happen with the Bengals, Kate, you and I are of the belief that he's not going to go to a bad situation, right? Like he's not going to go land with the Raiders with no quarterback. And I know Steeler fans, sorry, I'm going to burst your bubble a little bit. I know Steeler fans really want Tee Higgins, but Tee Higgins is not signing up to play with Justin Fields, right? Like he's either going to go to Washington to play with Jaden Daniels, or he's going to go to the Chargers to play with Justin Herbert. So I think no matter where he lands, it's going to be in a good situation that's going to raise his dynasty value.
Yeah, I think, him having that kind of control, let's say he doesn't get the franchise tag. Okay, well, if he does, he's with Joe Burrow. Okay, great. Like you mentioned, we saw plenty of production here and we didn't have to worry about it. He played 12 games this year, 3 top 5 finishes at the wide receiver position, including a finish as the overall wide receiver 1 in championship week. Even throughout the playoffs, wide receiver 17, wide receiver 59, wide receiver 15, 13. Like you see that consistent upside, but when he's healthy, asterisk, the floor is also pretty darn safe. And I think it's kind of hard to find a player that has that kind of upside while maintaining a relatively safe floor. The only question I have, like long-term health, again, like I'm patting him on the back for playing 12 games this year. It's been back-to-back years with 12 games.
Yep.
I want to get back to those 16-game seasons for Tee Higgins. He's had kind of these nagging hamstring issues. I don't know what to make of that part, but like watching the 2024 tape just tells me get over it and go buy Tee Higgins.
The guy that I want to buy from the AFC North is Zay Flowers. Was a Pro Bowl receiver this year. We saw his numbers go up. His yards went up. His yards per reception went up. The touchdowns didn't. Rashad Bateman stole a lot of the receiving touchdowns. And the Ravens ran for 1 billion touchdowns. They're probably going to do that every year as long as they have Lamar Jackson. But we saw Mark Andrews get back to scoring a bunch of touchdowns. Bateman had a bunch of touchdowns. I just think the touchdowns are coming for him, right? It's just once he gets the 7, 8, 9, 10 touchdown season, we're going to be looking at him as a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. And Kate, Lamar Jackson continues to improve as a passer. We saw Zay Flowers turn into the number 1 receiver that Baltimore's really never, ever had. I love Zay Flowers. I think he's a perfect fit in this offense. Todd Monken, their offensive coordinator, returning for his 3rd year with the team. A lot of continuity here. And you don't have to pay a ton to get him. Wide receiver 19 for a guy that is 24 years old and is an ascending player. I love Zay Flowers. I want him on my team.
See, I do love Zay Flowers, the player. I'm not as sold as you are on his dynasty value because I look at what do, these pass catchers that are more featured in the end zone for the Ravens have in common. They're all bigger than Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers, he's a smaller dice. He's not going to be overly physical, right? Like Rashad Bateman, he's 6'1". He has more meat on the bones. He's only 195 pounds. He's not a bulldozer, but he's still bigger than Zay Flowers. Mark Andrews, bigger than Zay Flowers. Isaiah Likely, bigger than Zay Flowers. That's the part that I'm just a little bit cautious about is that concern for touchdowns. Zay Flowers, he's 5'9", 174 pounds, quick as all get out. So, like, if he's in an open field, I think he's going to score. It's just a matter of how many touches are they going to generate for him that lead to that. And this was an outstanding season for Lamar Jackson, the passing game, and we still didn't see that touchdown total increase. So
I think some of it's just fluky, though, because there were a lot of times he got them right down to the 1-yard line. Okay, I look at somebody like Ladd McConkey, right, who Ladd is being drafted well ahead of Zay Flowers, but Ladd McConkey was 186 pounds. Zay Flowers is like 182 pounds, and we saw him double his touchdown production. That maybe that's just the quarterback. Herbert and the Chargers just aren't going to run for as many touchdowns as the Ravens would. But I guess the way I look at it, Kate, is he's the clear-cut number 1 receiver, the best receiver maybe Baltimore's ever had on maybe the best offense in the league. And I just want to be in on that player because would it surprise you if Zay Flowers went from basically 1,100 yards this year to 1,400 yards next year? Because it wouldn't surprise me at all.
I'm going to be honest, it kind of would surprise me. And I'm going to tell you what's, I think, even shocking, more shocking for me. Looking at red zone or end zone targets, Rashad Bateman led the team in end zone targets in the regular season, followed by Mark Andrews, followed by Isaiah Likely. Zay Flowers had 7 targets in the red zone all season long. That's crazy to me to be your team's wide receiver.
But do you think it's always going to be that way? Or do you think this is just the evolution of Zay Flowers' game? Like,
see, I think it, like when you look at the size, I think like, okay, it makes sense that he wouldn't be a featured guy in the red zone. He's not the physical type of ball player that Mark Andrews is. He doesn't have that kind of ball strength, right? So like, yeah, you might get him, 112 targets, but are those targets going to be in these high value situations that they're affording them to Rashad Bateman? Doesn't seem like it, but that's my point of hesitancy. It's not that I don't love Zay Flowers as a receiver, and I could very, very easily be wrong in this situation because generally speaking, good rule of thumb is to buy pass catchers attached to really good quarterbacks. So
Just for the sake of argument, let's talk about some of the guys that are being drafted behind Zay Flowers. So George Pickens, wide receiver 20.
I'll take George Pickens.
Okay. Chris Olave, wide receiver 21.
I'll take Zay.
Okay. Jordan Addison, wide receiver 22.
I'll take Addison.
Tyreek Hill, wide receiver 23.
I'll take Zay.
All right. So you're looking at him as
I'm
wide
not
receiver.
like super low on
not
him,
down
but
on
like
you're just not actively going out to try to buy him like I am.
yes.
Okay.
And
That's fine.
you know, so I always want, you know, I want us to be honest with our arguments here. I don't
No,
want
that's fine. I appreciate it.
yeah. I'll never agree just for the sake of
No, of course
agreeing. I like to hear myself talk too much. So
all right, let's talk about some players that we're trying to sell high this offseason from the AFC North. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so that you can focus on your day. An expert who will find every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy, all so that you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are reviewing the AFC North from the 2024 season and looking ahead to the 2025 offseason. Okay, let's talk about some players that we're going to try to sell high this offseason from this division. Who do you got?
I feel like Steelers fans are going to be pretty mad at me for this one, so I apologize in advance. I am a fellow Steelers fan, but I do think that for dynasty purposes, it's probably time to move on from Jaylen Warren and sell high, because Najee Harris, a free agent. We have Jaylen Warren, who's a restricted free agent, but I think the consensus is that he'll probably be back, right? Like, I think the price tag is reasonable enough that that should be sufficient. But, you know, this is a guy that has averaged somewhere around, you know, like 2.6 receptions per game. Okay. This is a guy that hasn't been a feature in the run game behind Najee Harris, even though he's largely been the more efficient running back. Never exceeded 4 scrimmage touchdowns, though he did hit over 1,100 scrimmage yards last year. Now, it's not because of his 2024 campaign that I'm of the belief it's time to move on. Jaylen Warren, he was pretty banged up throughout this 2024 season. Dealt with a knee injury, then dealt with like a back injury. I just don't think like we can fairly evaluate his overall efficiency profile based on that. But I do think like he's had some crucial fumbles throughout his career. He's a guy that I just don't think is ever going to be a primary workhorse. I think he's a super uber talented complementary running back, but I still think with the brand of football that Pittsburgh wants to play, they want a guy that they feel comfortable giving 20 plus carries in whatever game. And I just don't think Jaylen Warren's that guy.
Yeah, right now in Dynasty League football, being drafted as RB30, and that feels rich to me. You mentioned he's a restricted free agent. Pittsburgh is probably going to place the second round tender on him, bringing him back for $4 million. If they don't, that's even more concerning for me. If they just let him hit free agency, it just tells me that they don't think he's a very good player. And frankly,
26 years old, like 26. That's the same age as J.K. Dobbins, who's been in the league for at least 70 years.
I know,
right?
and that's what I was going to mention. He's going to turn 27 on November 1st. So, like, this is not a young running back that's just waiting for his shot. Like, he's older. One of the most telling things, and you mentioned like Jaylen Warren got injured. I think it was in week 1. He missed, I think about a month with a lower body injury. But at the end of the year, and I can't remember the specific game. I think it might have been the Bengals game in week 18. Najee came off the field, and it was Cordell Patterson that was getting like key touches in a game that Pittsburgh really had to win to try to avoid playing Baltimore in round 1, and not Jaylen Warren. For whatever reason, it feels like Arthur Smith and Mike Tomlin have just really soured on Jaylen Warren. I think we were all expecting more than 120 carries this year. We've seen his yards per carry dip from 5.3 in 2023 down to 4.3. I like Jaylen Warren, but at RB30 in an offense that I don't think is very good. Plus, Kate, you tell me if I'm wrong. You're the Steelers expert. Doesn't it feel like Pittsburgh's going to draft a running back sometime on day 2 this year?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think Pittsburgh prioritizes the run far too much. Their entire offensive philosophy. I know, Arthur Smith came in and we thought, yeah, that's going to do a little bit for the efficiency of the passing game. And it did. But the structure of everything evolves around the run. And everything stems from the idea of possessing the football.
Yep.
They took the ball out of Jaylen Warren's hands far too many times. And there's just not been enough, I think, to indicate to me that they trust him as a workhorse. He has never had more than 15 rush attempts in a game. And I know, like Najee Harris, one of his calling cards has been his overall durability throughout his tenure with the Steelers. But I mean, I think generally speaking, like, what is the upside? I don't really know. He's had one career game with more than 20 fantasy points in full PPR scoring formats.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't see this kind of workhorse role that everybody thinks could be in the cards. I think if they wanted to utilize him in that way, they probably would have by now. And we just haven't seen it despite these levels of efficiency. And some runners, despite the fact that, like, yeah, you look at 2023, for instance, Jaylen Warren was one of the most efficient running backs in most efficiency metrics that you could look at. But that doesn't always mean you should give them more carries, right? Sometimes there are these types of running backs that they stay fresh, they're uber efficient, but they're uber efficient because they're in a rotational role, not necessarily because they're Derrick Henry and thrive on increased workloads.
My player that I'm selling high, and remember we're talking about selling high, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's Joe Burrow for me, who is QB4.
Marcus.
I know. QB4 behind Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels. Hey, Kate, what do all 3 of those quarterbacks have in common? Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Jaden Daniels?
They love to use their legs.
Yeah, they love to use their legs. Joe Burrow is ahead of Jalen Hurts, and I get it. Burrow is 10 times the quarterback that Jalen Hurts is, but Jalen Hurts is so doggone consistent using his legs and on the tush push with the rushing touchdowns. You can just pencil in like 12 rushing touchdowns every year with Jalen Hurts.
Yeah.
I doubt you're going to be able to trade Burrow for Jalen Hurts straight up. I just don't think you're going to be able to do that. The question is, would you trade Joe Burrow for Patrick Mahomes straight up, who is being drafted at QB6? And to me, the answer is absolutely. I would do that in a heartbeat. Burrow had an unbelievable season. We think that Tee Higgins is probably going to be coming back. So you've got Tee Higgins, you've got Jamar Chase, and we know that this is a really good passing offense, but the health still really, really scares me. I know he stayed healthy this year, but I just trust Mahomes to stay healthier. I also trust that this Chiefs offense is going to get better, especially with Xavier Worthy going into year 2, Rashee Rice hopefully being healthy and serving his suspension at some point during the season. I would just rather cash in Burrow right now while his value is at an all-time high, rather than, again, there's a good chance that Burrow stays healthy and he's QB5, QB6, but to me, that's too big of a risk.
Yeah, and I still think, just generally speaking, like, this might also be dependent on what you expect for Tee Higgins. Do they get a long-term deal done? Maybe that's the tiebreaker for you, because if Joe Burrow is tied to, Tee Higgins, to Jamar Chase for, the next 4+ years, that feels a little bit better to me. Maybe you're still expecting some general regression. I mean, Joe Burrow, 6.6% touchdown rate in 2024. That was a career high for him. 289.3 passing yards per game, also a career high for Joe Burrow. Passer rating, like, you name it, there's probably going to be some regression here in the year to come for Joe Burrow. And yeah, the mobility, the lack of use of his legs, all kind of things that are generally concerning.
Now I will say Justin Herbert's QB7. I would not trade Burrow for Herbert because Herbert's got a lot of the same injury stuff. He's missed a bunch of time with games or a bunch of games with injuries.
Yeah.
And he's just not the prolific passer that Joe Burrow is. But if I can trade Burrow for Jalen Hurts or Patrick Mahomes straight up, I think I would do that.
For sure.
Okay. Let's talk about some sleepers that we want to dive into and some breakout candidates for 2025. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Attending NFL playoff games is an unforgettable experience that brings fans together. I love it. The atmosphere and the energy is incredible. I can't explain it. I went to a Bills playoff game a couple years ago. So much fun. Gametime now has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. Like if you wanted to go to the big game on Sunday, go check out the tickets for that. I recently used Gametime Picks to find some football tickets, not necessarily for the NFL, but for some other games, some comedy tickets. It's all great. Browsing through the deals was simple, and I found great values on all kinds of seats around the venue. The super deal was especially impressive, offering the best value for the event. The app's features like seat views before you buy and all-in pricing with no surprise fees at checkout make the experience smooth and reliable. Plus, the on-time ticket delivery and the lowest price guarantee gives me peace of mind whenever I'm buying tickets for my favorite events. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. 1 in the morning with Tyler Rowland, 1 in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins, available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Kate, let's do some 2025 breakouts and some sleepers. Who do you got?
I'm going to go with Isaiah Likely, backup tight end for the Baltimore Ravens, who we talked about in segment 1 a little bit. I talked about his usage in the end zone over, wide receiver 1, Isaiah Likely. I think the usage for Isaiah Likely in general was just so encouraging this year. 8 targets in the end zone. That was tied for the 6th most among all NFL tight ends, Marcus. 6th most.
Yeah.
You look at the touchdown upside, right? Scored 6 touchdowns as a backup tight end on 56 total targets, which ranked 27th among tight ends. He was one of the most productive tight ends, I think, who did more with less than just about anyone. Finishes the tight end 16 as a backup, and that was behind other receiving options like Rashad Bateman, who was a feature in the end zone, like behind Zay Flowers, who was the wide receiver 1. I think there's a lot of upside to Isaiah Likely's game, specifically as a receiver. And I think, again, it's going to be hard to look at what he was able to accomplish as a primary receiver with the absence of Zay Flowers here in the postseason and reconcile that moving forward. Like, I just want this guy on the field as often as possible moving forward.
How highly are you willing to value him? Like where among the tight ends would you want to draft him this offseason or trade for him?
I'm going to be honest. I'm going to prioritize him over, I'm obviously Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, Sam Laporta, TJ Hawkinson, these guys along the top. But after maybe the George Kittle, Tucker Kraft range, I think, tight end 9, tight end 10 feels like a pretty fair price for Isaiah Likely, given the upside. He's 24 years old. And I don't know. I don't think the Baltimore Ravens are going to hold anything against for, Mark Andrews in terms of that crucial drop, what it did for the game. But Mark Andrews is also getting older. He's 29 years old. Isaiah Likely, younger, a little bit more explosive. I don't know. Would you be surprised to see him taking over this offense sooner rather than later?
No, I wouldn't be surprised if they traded Andrews this offseason and tried to reset and get a little bit younger on offense. So I've got no issues there. Kid, I just want to mention Cedric Tillman is my guy. Now the concussion is obviously scary. He had a concussion in the Steeler game, the first Steeler game, and never returned to the field. Now, I think he was starting to get closer. They decided to shut him down. But in the 4 games before that, 4 full games, he was averaging 75.5 yards a game. Like, he was becoming a real threat in this Cleveland offense. And with Jerry Jeudy developing on the other side, I don't think the Browns are going to be big players at the wide receiver position this offseason. And I think they believe in what they currently have on the roster. We'll see what they do at quarterback. But right now, Cedric Tillman is being valued at wide receiver 61. I'm willing to throw a dart there because I like the talent, and I think he's got a pretty clear-cut path to playing time with Cleveland.
Yeah, pretty easily. And, Cedric Tillman, a guy that I liked a lot coming out of Tennessee, these Tennessee wide receivers kind of dart throws in general, because you don't necessarily know how they're going to translate to the pro game, but he's got 3rd-round draft capital. He's got a really nice combination of size, speed, athleticism. I think he's just kind of a balanced receiver. And when given that opportunity after the trade of Amari Cooper, I mean, he showed up, right? Like 9 receptions, 7 receptions, 7 receptions. Like, he was a pretty consistent feature in this offense, showed some touchdown upside. The question is, like, do you trust that there's going to be a quarterback that can get the ball?
Kirk Cousins, baby.
Kirk Cousins, maybe.
Jones.
And even any of these options better than what they were going to get with, Deshaun Watson just re-ruptured his Achilles. Like, he's out of the clear of the Deshaun Watson landmine. It's just a question of, like, what can they do to fill the QB hole in the meantime? We'll find out.
Yeah.
But I like Cedric Tillman.
I like Cedric Tillman. I kind of trust the Browns to figure this out. I like the front office.
That's a bold statement, Marcus.
Hold on. Let me rephrase that. I trust the Browns to figure out a way to get an average quarterback. And whether that's through the draft, where they drafted number 2, maybe that's Shedeur or Sanders, or maybe it's a free agent quarterback like Russell Wilson. Like, I think if Russell went to Cleveland, I get that. It's not exciting. But can Russell Wilson throw enough passes to make Cedric Tillman and Jerry Jeudy fantasy relevant? Yeah, I think so. I just don't think Cleveland's quarterback situation is going to be as bad as Deshaun Watson, Jameis Winston, Bailey Zappi, and Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who all played last year.
Fingers crossed. And you know what? Kevin Stefanski taking over play calling again here in 2025. We'll see how it works out.
Yeah.
But for now, I think this is a great opportunity to just kind of buy in on some talent that maybe those question marks are deflating the value of.
Yeah, I agree. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. On Friday's show, we're going to do some Senior Bowl winners and losers after 3 days of practice, so make sure you tune in for that. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.